Okay, hello. This lecture will be the last lecture on the Odyssey, books 19 to 24. Six books, and we'll finish up Oedipus, Odysseus's return home. Um, if you've read the entire book, you'll know that the um, the ending is quite violent. I think it goes against the sensibility of moderns when we see him killing everybody at the end. I'll try to give, I don't think I can justify it, but I'll try to give some sort of explanation within the culture of Greek, within the context of Greek culture. The most important part, of course, is the return home to Penelope. And we see that immediately in book 19. Remember, book 18 ended with the conflict between Odysseus and Iris, where he beats up the um, the beggar king. He calls him the beggar king, and Penelope sees all of this, and he's invited. Odysseus, remember, disguised as a beggar, is invited into her home. They 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 begin to um, connect by telling stories about themselves. And again, as I pointed out, this poem is a poem, a story about storytelling. There's no doubt that that's one of the key elements of the poem itself. Um, I think it's a fascinating idea that the very one of the very first stories in Western culture actually has a very self-reflective awareness of its own self, of its own nature as a story, and reflects upon the meaning of stories and their importance to human nature. Um, and sorrowful stories are part of that, right? There's an important element to this. I'll talk about it now and maybe a little bit at the end too. I've been mentioning the therapeutic nature of Odysseus' storytelling with the Phaeacians. I think in general the the, the therapeutic, the importance of therapy and storytelling as therapy, as being therapeutic for one's psyche, is the idea that it gathers up things that seem to have been lost and integrates them into one's narrative of one's life. And it's important that we do that to sorrowful things. Very important that we do this to things that hurt us. If we don't integrate the hurts in a positive way into our lives, this principle of psychology, they hurt us. They continue to hurt us. We continue to act them out. Frequently, we act them out against others, therefore thereby hurting other people. So, the way that these sorrowful stories are integrated into, brought to consciousness, and narrated by Odysseus and by Penelope, we see that it releases them, both of them. It frees them, and Penelope especially. So they tell their sorrows to each other, and she is a beautiful woman, right? But her um, her own sense of herself is gone. Her own sense of herself is gone because of the loss of Odysseus. He says to her, "I am a man who's had his share of sorrows." This is at 130. It's book 19, 130. "It's wrong for me in someone else's house to sit here moaning and groaning, sobbing so. It makes things worse, this grieving on and on." And her response is very positive. "No, no, stranger. Not stranger friend. Stranger." Wise Penelope demurred. "Whatever form and feature I had, what praise I'd won, the deathless gods destroyed that day the Achaeans sailed away to Troy, my husband in their ships, Odysseus. If he could return to tend my life, the renown I had would only grow in glory. Now my life is torment. Look at the griefs some god has loosed against me. I would say Penelope is right. Um, that the gods have made her suffer. Um, she has really done nothing to deserve the torture she's getting, the torment she's getting, and she accepts it. The way that she accepts this is very powerful, I think. So Odysseus hears this, and he tells a story, and of course it's false. It's a made-up story. This is articulated at line 234. Falsehoods all, but he gave his falsehoods all the ring of truth. When you read that, you must think back to the stories he told the Phaeacians and wonder about them. How truthful were they? Were they tales to disguise? Were they tales to entertain? It's undecidable. But they certainly were tales to embellish. And they were tales to confess, despite the fact that perhaps Odysseus was trying to hide something. Here he's hiding his own identity, but he's suggesting to Penelope that Odysseus will return. And her response right afterward is a beautiful image. As she listened on, her tears flowed and soaked her cheeks as the heavy snow melts down from the high mountain ridges. This is an epic simile. As the heavy snow melts down from the high mountain ridges, snow the west wind piles there and the warm east wind thaws, and the snow melting swells the rivers to overflow their banks. So she dissolved in tears, streaming down her lovely cheeks, weeping for him, her husband, sitting there beside her. Odysseus' heart went out to his grief-stricken wife, but under his lids his eyes remained stock still. They might have been horn or iron. His guile fought back his tears. And she, once she'd had her fill of grief and weeping, turned again to her guest with this reply. Now, stranger. Keeps calling him a stranger. It's a brilliant, brilliant idea because he actually is her husband. The construction of stranger friend does not apply here. She seems to intuit something. I think I'll test you just to see if there in your house with all his friends in arms you actually entertained my husband as you say. Come, tell me what sort of clothing he wore. What kind of man was he? What are the men who followed in his train? So Odysseus goes and describes himself. And his words renewed her deep desire to weep, recognizing the strong, clear signs Odysseus offered. This is at line 285, 286. Right? Why? Because they bring back all of the memories of 20 years ago, pretty much newlyweds 20 years ago. Penelope's response, she calls him a friend, but a special friend. His words renewed her desire to weep, recognizing the strong, clear signs Odysseus offered. But as soon as she'd had her fill of tears, Penelope turned. Now, stranger, much as I pitied you before, now in my house you'll be my special friend, my honored guest. I am the one myself who gave him the very clothes that you describe. Right. So she calls him a special friend. But there's a wonderful passage at line 297. Penelope speaks. She says, when she talks about the day he left, a black day it was when he took ship to see that cursed city. Destroy, I call it. I hate to say its name. You get the joke. Instead of Troy, it's Destroy, right? So a little play on words there. I've asked uh, a classics professor if there is a play in the Greek on Troy and Destroy. I kind of gave a little bit of a strange answer, so I can't remember what it was. I think he said there was some kind of play there, but it's clear in the English. There must be some play in the Greek language. So Odysseus now tells Penelope, "Your man is on his way home," and her response is she denies that he'll return. She can't believe it. She won't accept this. She says at 363, Odysseus, there was a man. Or was he all a dream? So long ago, not much time with each other. So she's having a hard time accepting this. She goes into a discussion of the treatment of guests. And remember, this I've been eating her out of house and home. She says, our lives are, this is at line 377. Very good articulation of the guest-host relationship. Our lives are much too brief. If a man is cruel by nature, cruel in action, the mortal world will call down curses on his head while he is alive. And all will mock his memory after death. But then if a man is kind by nature, kind in action, his guests will carry his fame across the earth, and people all will praise him from the heart. So it's here that Odysseus's old nurse, recognizes Odysseus. And the way she does is she sees the scar on his leg above his knee. He received it when a boar pierced his knee when he was younger. It's finally here that his name is revealed. The son of pain at 464. Odysseus becomes very violent. He says, do not tell Penelope. I think one gets the sense that he doesn't trust her. Penelope will spill the beans, and that he needs to come on these guys in surprise. So he's afraid that she'll reveal him. So I think this is the reason why he doesn't let Penelope know now. So Penelope here, her special friend, she asks for advice, and she tells of a dream that an eagle killed her 20 geese, and Odysseus interprets it by saying, those 20 were the suitors, and someone is going to come down and kill them, right? So Penelope, this is an interesting little tidbit here about Greek culture. She tells of the two horns by which dreams enter it, 630 to 638. The horn of let me see, the horn of forgotten this. Sorry, on the wrong page. The horn of one is made of are gates. One is made of ivory. One is made of horn. The one made of ivory are not true. The one made of horn, the gate made of horn, is true. So she's wondering, which is true. Is this a dream that you can believe or not believe? Isn't that an interesting question? um, so um, her the upshot of book 19 is that Penelope becomes motivated now to test the suitors, and she proposes a contest. She pulls out Odysseus's bow. Well, she doesn't pull it out yet, but she someone is going to have to take Odysseus's bow and shoot an arrow through 12 axes. Um, and so we'll see the upshot of all of this. Um, the the interesting thing about Penelope is that although Odysseus is disguised as a beggar, um, both Penelope and Nausicaa before her were able to recognize his character through the beggarly disguise. And with Nausicaa's case, it wasn't a disguise at all. But this is an interesting aspect of the guest-host relationship. The guest-host relationship reveals the character of the person as well. The guest performs certain duties and certain functions and certain rites in this whole ritual, and Odysseus is a really great guest because he's got a tremendous, despite his hubris of the past, despite his pride. So book 20 then begins with Odysseus watching the serving women sleeping with the suitors. This has become a complete nightmare, right? And Penelope here prays for death. She doesn't want to marry a lesser man than Odysseus. All of her memories have been stirred up, and her prayer is at 101, line 101 to 113 in book 20, and it seems that Zeus will answer her. We know that it's true. Odysseus will return. So the character of this book is generally one about the suitor's bad behavior, insults directed to Odysseus, Telemachus challenging the suitors, and there's one really kind of grotesque scene in book 20. It's a very short book. At a couple of passages worth looking at the very end. Athena comes and transforms their feasting into a grotesque display at 384. So he vowed, and it's right after this vow, this vow by Telemachus, and it said Athena set off uncontrollable laughter in the suitors, crazed them out of their minds. Mad, hysterical laughter seemed to break from the jaws of strangers, not their own, and the meat they were eating oozed red with blood. Tears flooded their eyes, hearts possessed by grief. The inspired seer Theoclymenus wailed out in their midst, "Poor men, what terror is this that overwhelms you so? Night shrouds your heads, your faces down to your knees. Cries of mourning are bursting into fire, cheeks rivering tears, the walls and the handsome crossbeams dripping dank with blood. Ghosts, look! Thronging the entrance, thronging the court, go trooping down to the world of death and darkness. The sun is blotted out of the sky. Look there. A lethal mist spreads all across the earth." So this weird image of portending, first of all, turning their into a gross, bloody mess of animalistic behavior, and then the prophecy of their death. This comes even more explicitly a little later. Eurymachus, the inspired prophet, countered, When I want your escort, I'll ask for it myself. I have eyes and ears and both my feet still, and a head that's fairly sound. These will do to take me past those doors. I can see it now, the disaster closing on you all. There's no escaping it, no way out, not for a single one of you suitors. Wild, reckless fools, plotting outrage here, the halls of Odysseus, great and strong as a god. At the same time, Penelope is biding her time. The 8 lines of the book, book 20, and all the while Icarius' daughter, wise Penelope, had placed her carved chair within earshot at the door, so she could catch each word they uttered in the hall. Laughing rowdily, men prepared their noonday meal, succulent, rich. They butchered quite a herd. But as for supper, what could be less enticing than what a goddess and a powerful man would spread before them soon, a groaning feast, for they'd been first to plot their vicious crimes. So we see that it's not just simply the fact that they've violated the guest host relationship and they're eating all the food. It's really more importantly that they're plotting to kill Telemachus, and they're plotting to take over the house. So not only a violation of the guest host relationship, this is an injustice. So the last 4 books have a kind of structure. Book 21 is the test, the arrow shooting test. 22 is the conflict between the suitors and Odysseus, the strategy. 23 is the unity of the family. 24 is the unity of the city, and it points to Athena as the guardian of laws, an idea that will be picked up in Aeschylus's Odyssey, which we will not read, but which is a very interesting account of the origins of law. So the fact that these 4 books have a very important structure is announced. This is the end. Book 21 begins the time to come. Right. Athena with her blazing eyes, inspired Penelope, wary poised to set the bow and the gleaming iron axes out before her suitors, waiting in Odysseus' hall to test their skill and bring their slaughter on. So we see that even though Odysseus has not consulted her, they are like-minded. They seem to be intuiting the same idea. And of course, Athena has set the whole thing up. All right. So she sets out the axes. There's a brilliant description of her taking out the bow from lines 13 to 49. This is a kind of made for television, made for video scene. If I was going to do this, I would come what's it called? Very close to. There's a word for it that I can't remember what it is, but you just focus on her hands. I would focus on her hands slowly, the way she takes all of this stuff out with such care and such love. It's a marvelous scene. The whole scene, right? It's from 13 to 72 of her taking out the bow and the arrows. So she comes out, insults the suitors. Telemachus challenges them, and they can't do it. They can't even string the bow. Odysseus now reveals himself to anyone else in the court who is an attendant to him, and they all say they'll fight if Odysseus would appear. So he's got them riled up and ready to go. He shows the scar as a sign of his identity. And then Odysseus, the beggar, comes out. He says, I'll try it. And he's mocked. The suitors all mock him. He's insulted by Antinous. Of course, Odysseus shoots an arrow through the axes, and the suitors watch in horror. There's an ironic command to Telemachus at 471, lines 471 to 479. Telemachus, this is, at the very end of book 21. Telemachus, Odysseus looked to his son and said, "Your guest sitting here in your house has not disgraced you. No missing the mark, look, and no long labor spent to string the bow. My strength's not broken yet, not quite so frail as the mocking suitor thought. But the hour has come to serve our masters right, supper in broad daylight, then to other revels, song and dancing, all that crowns a feast." This is true irony, of course. What's coming next is death. He's got the arrow in his hand. No problem. He begins to shoot the suitors with the arrows. Antinous is first, and I think this is a very satisfying, funny scene. I'll read it. But Odysseus aimed and shot Antinous square in the throat, and the point went stabbing clean through the soft neck and out, and off to the side he pitched. The cup dropped from his grasp as the shaft sank home, and the man's lifeblood came spurting from his nostrils. Thick red jet. A sudden thrust of his foot. He kicked away the table. Food showered across the floor. The bread and meat soaked in a swirl of bloody filth. I find that satisfying and humorous and funny. The fact that he kicks over the food that he was about to eat. There goes the feast. And so the suitors burst into uproar. They start leaping around. They're trying to defend themselves. Everything's been removed. They were blind, right? And they still remain blind to their own doom. There's a passage. Let's see. It actually repeats a line from the Iliad of when soldiers remain blind to their own doom. No fear of the gods who rule the skies up there, Odysseus says about the men. No fear that men's revenge might arrive someday. Now all your necks are in the noose, your doom is sealed. The passage read, "Nor can they glimpse the death and black gloom hover over them." There's an attempt by Eurymachus to blame Antinous, right? Who's the head soldier, and Odysseus is having none of it. They're guilty too, simply by collaborating. Their bad behavior, and they were all ready to kill Telemachus. So there's no getting away from the guilt here. The Telemachus and Odysseus fight side by side. It's interesting that Odysseus here, for the first time, the suitors begin to fight back. For the first time, Odysseus shows some fear. It says at 156, Odysseus' knees shook. His heart, too, when he saw them buckling on their armor, brandishing long spears. Here was a battle looming. He turned at once to Telemachus, warnings flying. "A bad break in the fight, my boy. One of the women's tipped the odds against us, or could it be the goat herd?" And it turns out Telemachus left the door ajar, so they wound up getting some of the weapons. Odysseus's fear is not a sign of weakness. It's actually a sign of that his rashness, his reckless ways are gone. When you see in the Iliad figures who are forgetful of death, they become reckless and rash. That's not courage. Courage is overcoming one's fear and doing what's right, facing the battle. So this is not a sign of weakness. This shows courage on Odysseus' part. The rest of the time we see previous to this, he's been reckless and rash. Rashness is not a virtue. Courage is. The Athena arrives, disguised as mentor to give him courage. She recalls his exploits at Troy, says, "You've done greater battle than this." Odysseus winds up in another particularly satisfying moment, killing the priest. And the praying head went tumbling into the dust, it says. The praying head went tumbling into the dust. This is a repeat of a scene in the Iliad where a spy is captured, and he's begging for his own life, and they cut off his head, I think, or they kill him, slice his throat, and he's still talking and he starts as he's talking, he's chewing the ground. He literally bites the dust. I think that's where the phrase "bites the dust" comes from. He's still talking, still trying to save his own life while his jaws are chewing at the ground. Same with the priest, still praying as he's dying, as he's tumbling into the dust. The only person that Odysseus spares is the bard, I think, for obvious reasons. This is right. The singer is not to blame. The singer is just there singing. Remember, Zeus is to blame, not the singer. And in some ways, Zeus is residing over this attack as well. There are a couple of similes, epic similes. Always important to point these out. There aren't as many epic similes in the Odyssey as there are in the Iliad. So when they appear, it's important to read them. So the dead men, he found them one and all in blood and dust, great hulls of them down and out like fish that fishermen drag from the churning gray surf in looped and coiling nets and fling ashore on a sweeping hook of beach. Some noble catch, heaped on the sand, twitching, lusting for fresh salt sea, but the sun god hammers down and burns their lives out. So the suitors lay in heaps, corpse covering corpse. A really disgusting scene, but scene fisherman bringing in his haul. Odysseus here, confronted by his nurse. She found Odysseus in the thick of slaughtered corpses, splattered with bloody filth, like a lion that's devoured some ox in the field and lopes home covered with blood. His chest streaked, both jaws glistening, dripping red, a sight to strike terror. So Odysseus looked now, splattered with gore, his thighs, his fighting hands, and she, when she saw the corpse. So there's the simile. Now this is an interesting interlude. All the pooling blood was about to lift a cry of triumph. Here was a great exploit, look. But the soldier held her back and checked her zeal with warnings winging home. Here is where we see Odysseus has really learned his lesson. Rejoice in your heart, old woman, peace. No cries of triumph now. Unholy to glory over the bodies of the dead. This is a lesson he learned from Troy. These men, the doom of the gods has brought low, and their own indecent acts. That's an important point. Their own Their own indecent acts and the gods have brought this about. They had no regard for any man on earth, good or bad, who chanced to come their way, and so, thanks to their reckless work, they meet this shameful fate. Again, that word reckless, right? Their reckless work. So, Odysseus did not glory over their dead bodies. That is a shameful thing to do. He's, again, learned this. Well, he watched Achilles glory over Hector's dead body for days in the Iliad. He's learned his lesson. No pride. He's doing his job. This is an act of justice that he's performing. Very important key idea. The house then, after every disloyal person is killed, the house is scoured with fire and brimstone. You've got to just clean the whole thing out, totally disinfect the house. So that's the conflict and the resolution of the conflict. 23 is about the unity of the family, and especially the unity of Odysseus and Penelope. It's a beautiful scene. Penelope's response to the news of Odysseus is lengthy. It begins at 11. Dear old nurse, the gods have made you mad. They have that power, putting lunacy into the clearest head around, or setting a half-wit on the path to sense. They've unhinged you, and you were once so sane. Why do you mock me? Haven't I wept enough, telling such wild stories, interrupting my sleep, sweet sleep that held me, sealed my eyes just now? Not once have I slept so soundly since the day Odysseus sailed away to that cursed city. Destroy, I call it. Again, that play on the word Troy. Destroy, I call it. I hate to say its name. Now go you down, back to your own quarters. If any other woman of mine had come to me, rousing me out of sleep with such a tale, I'd have her bundled back to her room in pain. It's only your old gray head that spares you that. The nurse responds, no, it's all true. He's here. Odysseus, he's come home just as I tell you. He's the stranger they all manhandled in the hall. Telemachus knew he was here for days, but he knew enough to hide his father's plans so he could pay those vipers back in time. Penelope wavers between joy and disbelief. Who wouldn't? But they confront each other at line 186. This is worth a read as well. She refuses to believe, and Odysseus says, strange woman, so hard. The gods of Olympus made you harder than any other woman in the world. What other wife could have a spirit so unbending, holding back from her husband, home at last for her, after bearing 20 years of brutal struggle? Come, nurse, make me a bed, I'll sleep alone. She has a heart of iron in her breast. Strange man, wary Penelope said. I'm not so proud, so scornful, nor am I overwhelmed by your quick change. You look, how well I know the way he looked, setting sail from Ithaca years ago aboard the long-oared ship. Come, Euryclea, move the sturdy bedstead out of our bridal chamber. That room the master built with his own hands. Take it out now, sturdy bed that it is, and spread it deep with fleece, blankets, and lustrous throws to keep him warm. So she's going to give him her bed. And of course, this is a test, because Odysseus made that bed. And this is her way of finding out if it's really Odysseus or not. And he passes the test because he's made the bed. Listen to what he says. Putting her husband to the proof, but Odysseus blazed up in fury, lashing out at his real wife. Woman, your words, they cut me to the core. Who could move my bed? Impossible task, even for some skilled craftsman, unless a god came down in person, quick to lend a hand, lifted it out with ease and moved it elsewhere. Not a man on earth, not even at peak strength, would find it easy to prize it up and shift it. No, a great sign, a hallmark lies in its construction. I know, I built it myself. No one else. There was a branching olive tree inside our court, grown to its full prime, the bole like a column thick set. Around it I built my bedroom, finished off the walls with good tight stonework, roofed it over soundly and added doors, hung well and snugly wedged. Then I lopped the leafy crown of the olive, cutting clean the stump bare from roots up. Planing it round with a bronze smoothing adze, I had the skill. So that's our secret sign, he says. I tell you, our life story. Does the bed, my lady, still stand planted firm? I don't know. Or has someone chopped away that olive trunk and hauled our bedstead off? So, proof, right? This is in the poem I wrote, if you read it, this is the last line, that Penelope's mind was fixed upon that motionless olive tree. So, living proof, Penelope felt her knees go slack, her heart surrender, recognizing the strong, clear signs Odysseus offered. She dissolved in tears, rushed to Odysseus, flung her arms around his neck and kissed his head and cried out. The gods, she says, it was the gods who sent us sorrow. They grudged us both a life in each other's arms, from the heady zest of youth to the stoop of old age. But don't fault me, angry with me now because I failed at the first glimpse to greet you, hold you so. In my heart of hearts I always cringed with fear some fraud might come, beguile me with his talk. Remember Helen of Argos. Would she have sported so in a stranger's bed if she had dreamed that Achaea's sons were doomed to fight and die to bring her home again? Some god spurred her to do her shameless work. But now, since you have revealed such overwhelming proof, the secret sign of our bed, which no one's ever seen but you and I and a single handmaid, who kept the doors of our room you built so well, you conquered my heart, my hard heart at last. So the loyalty of Odysseus is really what she's saying here is so hard. So his response at 259, the more she spoke, the more a deep desire for tears welled up inside his breast. He wept as he held the wife he loved, the soul of loyalty in his arms at last. Joy warm as the joy that shipwrecked sailors feel when they catch sight of land. Poseidon has struck their well-rigged ship on the open sea with gale winds and crushing walls of waves, and only a few escape swimming, struggling out of the frothing surf to reach the shore. Their bodies crusted with salt, but buoyed up with joy as they plant their feet on solid ground again, spared a deadly fate. Right, this is the final shipwreck. The epic simile here is a simile referring to Odysseus' own ship with the Phaeacian, landing with the Phaeacians and finding Nausicaa there. But now he arrives with his wife, finally at home. So the image here, I think, is very important. Just a couple more passages to read. They confide in each other. They talk to one another. And at 337, the poet says, rejoicing in each other, they returned to their bed, the old familiar place they loved so well. And their unity is described at 342, 343. The royal couple, once they'd reveled in all the longed-for joys of love, reveled in each other's stories. The radiant woman telling of all she poured at home, watching them there, the infernal crowd of suitors slaughtering herds, And great Odysseus told his wife of all the pains he had dealt out to other men and all the hardships he had endured himself, his story first to last, and she listened and on enchanted. Sleep never sealed her eyes till all was told. I wonder if he told her about Circe and Calypso. I doubt it. Yeah, that the wonderful thing about it is the lovemaking and then the telling of stories, the sorrow that binds them, the shared sorrow. So stories of suffering are shared and unite them. So the unity of the family is established by the unity of the city. So there's a lengthy description of Agamemnon and Achilles' death and their funeral rites as a prelude to the suitors' entrance into Hades. It gives some closure on the Iliad that was not given in the Iliad. The death of Achilles is not told in the Iliad. That's a mythological story. Agamemnon's death is not told there either. The Oresteia gives an account of Agamemnon's death. But the contrast here between Achilles and Odysseus. Achilles dies in battle. Odysseus returns home. The contrast between Agamemnon. Agamemnon comes home to a disloyal wife who kills him. Agamemnon's wife literally kills Agamemnon. But Odysseus returns to a loyal wife. Very important. We find Agamemnon actually praising her loyalty. Penelope's deception. By the way, we see Odysseus and Penelope as two peas in a pod here. Their deceptions are both very similar, witty, contrived, and very capable. The stories of life and death we get here are very important at the very beginning. It frames these stories of Hades frame the end of the poem. Odysseus here tests his father, and I'm really not sure about this. This seems finally like it too much, but I'm not going to go into it very much. But it just seems like a little bit too harsh. But the end here is the establishment of peace. The suitors' families seek vengeance. And the poet says, the rumor the heralds sped like wildfire through the city, crying out the news of the suitors' bloody death and doom. The complaint is that Odysseus brought death to the men who went to Troy, and now has killed the best sons left behind. All very true. What's Odysseus going to say? So they seek to punish the murderers of their brothers and sisters. Brothers and sons. What does one say about this? Well, the Iliad has come to Ithaca, right? The terrible cost of the Trojan War lives on after the war is over. The men do not return. All the best men don't return. The sons that are left over have been killed because they had no fathers. They had no way to behave well, no one to teach them. So you've got civil war. You've had no civic life for 20 years, and the warrior Odysseus has to return. This takes a god to do this. This is going to end up very poorly. Ithaca will probably be destroyed if they can't solve this in some peaceable way. So Zeus comes into play. He's the one who's responsible for the guest-host relationship. He's going to establish the end of this. The cycle has to stop somehow. And I think this is a fascinating little interlude and an interesting suggestion about the nature of Greek law. It points to the establishment of Greek civilization later on. Zeus gives instructions to Athena on how to solve the dispute. He says, "Let us purge their memories of the bloody slaughter. Let peace and wealth come cresting through the land." Purge their memories. Let us purge their memories of the bloody slaughter. So purge is not to remove, but to purify their memories. Not to wipe it clean, I don't think. So a purgation kind of leads to a kind of peace, I think. So Zeus sanctions. Athena acts. Zeus sanctions the law. Athena kind of executes it. She appears as mentor with Odysseus and his father and son. They fight together, but Athena stops the fight so it doesn't break out into civil war. She has been one of those characters that have been fighting in the Iliad frequently. Here she brings in peace. Let me read the final section of this poem. So Athena commanded, terror blanched their faces. They went limp with fear. Weapons slipped from their hands and strewed the ground at the goddess's ringing voice. They spun in flight to the city, wild to save their lives, but losing a savage cry. The long-enduring great Odysseus, gathering all his force, swooped like a soaring eagle. Just as the son of Cronos hurled a reeking bolt that fell at her feet, the mighty father's daughter and blazing-eyed Athena wheeled on Odysseus, crying, "Royal son of Laertes, Odysseus, master of exploits, hold back now. Call a halt to the great leveler war. Don't court the rage of Odysseus who rules the world. On the battlefield, fine, but not here. Odysseus is called to establish peace because he's the king. He had to scare them, but he's not to kill them. Or Zeus will pay him back." So an interesting, very interesting passage here, where he's warned by Athena not to kill. Zeus will punish him. And again, the interesting thing about the fact that the Iliad, the war at Troy, has come here 20 years later. Its effects are so devastating. War is such a horrible thing. It destroys a whole generation. 20 years is normally considered a generation. So it's got to stop here. So this is the establishment here of Athena as an arbiter of law. So she commanded, he obeyed her glad at heart, and Athena handed down her pacts of peace, between both sides for all the years to come. The daughter of Zeus, who shields storm and thunder. Yes, but the goddess still kept Mentor's build and voice. Okay, so that's a funny little thing, and here's how that weird thing I interpret it as this. Mentor. Mentor is the spokesperson here. How do we understand the establishment of law? Well, it's got a kind of divine inspiration for the Greeks, but it's human too. It's made by human persons. It's kept up by human persons, but it has a kind of divine sanction. That's what is being established here at the end of the Odyssey. We'll see that this question of law, the laws of nature, the laws of the gods, and human law, as a major point of conflict in Oedipus Tyrannus and Antigone. But the divine intervention here, almost law being a kind of inspiration from above, having a kind of divine power, but it has to be recognized by human beings. So Mentor retains his human form. There's a human element to law, and there's this divine element. It somehow breaks the circle of violence that we find in pre-civilized cultures. It is a moment of, one might say, grace, right? That intervenes in the moment of conflict to solve conflicts peaceably rather than through violence. So I think a very interesting way to end this poem. It actually ends the Iliad, and it ends the entire setup, the entire two poems, the Iliad and the Odyssey. I'll finish with a little reflection on a question about Homer. It's been argued that, back and forth, the question of Homer's identity. Did he write the Odyssey and the Iliad? Is it the work of two authors? My own sense is that because of the way these things are interwoven, and the way in which very important but seemingly minor details are picked up and tied up here at the end from the Iliad, strikes me as this is the work of a single author. You don't find this kind of unity in many authors. You also don't find wasted stuff that just seems like additions from some minor author that would be thrown in. These poems are remarkably structured, and you can find a unity within each poem and a unity between the poems, and a difference, right? We see one side of Zeus in war and one side of Zeus in the guest-host relationship. Those are both elements that would be present in Greek culture, but the way they're articulated strikes me as a kind of unified mind. So I think Homer is one writer, which is a remarkable idea given that these are two of the greatest works of literature, the history of Western culture, and they're the first. So it's my admiration for Homer and for the Iliad and the Odyssey, deep and profound. The Odyssey really sets forth the paradigm and the model for all stories in Western culture. The story of what's called the Romansbildung, the creation, the discovery of oneself through a journey and through adventures, tales, hardships, suffering. It's the archetype. It's an archetypal tale. So it's really the model, one of the great models for Western civilization. Okay, so that's it for the Odyssey. The next lecture that will be up will be a lecture on the transition from epic tragedy from the epic to tragedy, and then a discussion of Oedipus Tyrannus. So I will see you again with the next lecture.